On today's episode, we talked to Dean Lambert.
Dean Lambert.
He has brought on this new mission and brought this new project to life. It's called the Love Always Project, and it is made to help you understand the importance of pre-planning your
Funeral.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Cabal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Cabal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
Well, Nick, today we have quite the guest. We brought on Dean Lambert. What do you think of that?
Well, I'd love to hear what he's all about. What's he doing over in Iowa? Is that where you're steady from?
I'm in central Iowa where it's 14 degrees now. So if
nice.
this happens to be listened to by somebody who's listening in the summer, maybe it'd be a nice cool breeze for them.
Well,
Yeah.
we came across your Love Always project, and I think this is incredible. And to be honest, it's exactly what Doc Nick and I have been trying to do with Let's Talk About Death in general, which is to get people to start openly talking and discussing about death. And part of that is preparing for the end. Not only in the funeral profession, as in like pre-needs and stuff. It's more than that. It's actually having the discussion that'll help you navigate the grief in such a healthier expression. So I think it's incredible what you're doing. Can you give us like a brief synopsis of the Love Always project in your words?
Yes. So when I work for a company that is a supplier to the funeral business, we actually fund prearranged funerals. And so we work with funeral homes across the country. And this has sort of been a dream of mine. I've been with the company for almost 2.5 decades now, even though I know I don't look it. I'm sure you guys are flabbergasted.
I think you look 21, 22, somewhere around there.
I feel 21. But anyway, I've always felt that, sometimes working through a funeral home is difficult. I mean, almost every allied profession to the funeral profession has difficulty because funeral directors have a lot going on. They don't consider themselves salespeople; they're service people, and it's hard for them to reach out and talk actively or proactively to their communities about things they should be prepared for and think about. And plus, they're very busy with the business at hand, which is helping families when a death happens.
Dean, are you saying that funeral directors are busy people?
Well, yes. And over the last couple of years, they've been very busy, and both you guys know, I think that growing up in a funeral home, that they're not always, business minded. A lot of these firms are generational, and they know how things should go in a funeral home to make it operate and take care of the communities to make sure people traditionally get buried. But now things are changing a little bit. There's more cremations and things, but especially during COVID, when somebody raises their hand and calls and says there's a death in the family or somebody's imminent, there's a process that they go through, and that is it's all encompassing. They're very focused on that. And, it's nobody's really provided a lot of training to them to how to minister to families to make sure that they're as prepared as possible. And that means talk about it in advance. And there's all kinds of psychology, as you guys might know, in, lawyers are never ambulance chased. Now they're all over the air and all over per inquiry ads all night long talking about you need me for this and that. And I don't think the funeral profession has come that far yet, at least not as a profession, at large. So what I was promoting in my company is, hey, what is a way that we can engage more consumers around end of life planning? Just thinking about how to have the talk with elderly or ill parents, how to have the talk to your kids. There are people who are in their 40s now that are part of what we call the sandwich generation that have young kids at home or kids in school, and they have adult parents that may be getting old enough that they're starting to think about those things. Or, God forbid, somebody's parent dies and one comes to live with them, and now they're strained in lots of ways. Their space, their money, their time, things like that. So we just know that through social listening and working with some pretty smart marketing and research people, that this is a topic that's just bubbling in the undercurrent. If you do a lot of social listening and you do research, people are fascinated by end of life and death, and B, they're thinking about it a lot, for whether it's a Bob Saget death or whether it's COVID or whether it's stuff happening on a border somewhere. People are concerned about their future and well-being, and so the problem is it's just not at the surface. So we're wringing our hands about it, but we don't know what to do about it. And so we decided to engage consumers. We were going to invest time, energy, effort, and they let me do it because I've been blabbing about it long enough to work with a team to start this project that we feel is best suited to be grassroots. We don't want to talk at people. We want to give as much information as we can, but that information is going to evolve as we listen and pay attention to what people are saying about their experiences or their lack of experiences. So it's just a grassroots effort to help promote discussion. We want to provide people information and get people aware of what their options are. And then, of course, we want to find ways to provide them access to funeral homes across the country or whatever resources they might need to act upon, what they finally feel is right for them at the time that's right for them.
We can all agree, right, that society doesn't like to talk about death, right? So
Exactly.
how do you and your the project, how are you guys tearing down that stigma? How are you guys detaching from that
Well,
wall?
yeah, we're
if you
early
will?
on. Yeah, we're early on right now. And so what we did when we actually launched our social media sites, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Twitter is just basically repurposing some of that content. And then we have the website. So we're using all of the best practices possible to get out what this mission is and hopefully attract folks. So we're hearing a lot from folks like you who are interested and want to ally with people who have voices or organizations who have voices. I think collectively it's really is the way it's going to happen. It's not just going to be the Love Always Project. It's going to be you guys with Let's Talk About Death. It's going to be, the funeral home that you are part of. I think that, what we saw in just a couple of weeks of launching our Facebook page and Instagram page is people are just naturally finding, there's people searching for this stuff. We put out a reel, those little short TikTok videos now that are on, Facebook and everybody trying to duplicate TikTok-ish kind of stuff. We put out a reel, and within 4 days, we had 4,000 views. Now, that's not a lot for somebody's out there who's, cooking something and punching their refrigerator or whatever else happens on TikTok. But that's a lot for when you consider that we didn't do anything but good SEO and launch and open up a Facebook page and an Instagram with some things about, information about, the top 5 things you need to do to plan your funeral, or the top 5 things not to say to somebody who's had experienced a recent death. And so we know that people are out there sort of voyeuristically trying to figure things out. And a lot of times it's because they've heard about a death, or they've, how they say it comes in threes. Their 3 favorite rock stars all of a sudden died or something
absolutely.
like that. And they get in the mindset, and then they start thinking and reflecting. And of course, there's the host of people who have had these experiences where they go to a funeral of somebody's father and get inspired, or they remember their own father. And, they just hit a certain age and a certain collective experiences that makes them want to Google whatever it is that gets them into our space. And so we have to make sure we have excellent content that is uplifting, that is experiential. And our goal is to have, 60% of the content that's wherever we are, that's user generated, or generated by other experts, people who are having great, excellent, fun conversations like you guys are. So that's what we hope. We hope people get the message that planning in advance, the funeral part of it is important. Obviously, it is a good thing to do. We've talked to people who have planned and funded their funerals before. Every other year, we do research of people who've done it. And I can share this data with you. We're just about ready to release our 6th edition of this book that basically has attitudes, opinions, and beliefs of people who've prearranged and paid for their funerals. And there are no people who report being unsatisfied with the decision. It's always very or completely satisfied. There's no not satisfied with the decision to do it.
I 100% agree with you. The families that we have the honor of serving, and when they have the opportunity of mom and dad came in, or mom came in and did a pre-need, you can just see the relief on them.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That they don't have to worry about picking out choices. They don't have to worry about what mom or dad wanted, because that's the problem, really.
Right.
It's the ones that don't, because the idea is, especially if you tell one kid one way and one kid the other, now there's a even more discussion and almost a fight on what do we do, and if we do it wrong, who's in the right or wrong. So yeah, absolutely, like planning. And even if, let's say, even if money is not involved, or even if you
Take it
don't
out.
go to your
Right.
even if you don't go to the funeral home, the idea of just sitting down and having a dinner with your children all together and saying, this is what I want, does wonders in
Yeah.
the first steps of grieving.
You've probably been in a lot of arrangements where the person who moved away, who was one of the siblings, comes back, and there's a sibling who was the caretaker for dad as he was sick and dying. And the sibling that comes in says, well, dad told me he wanted to be cremated. And the person has been taken care of. So he never mentioned that to me. And all of a sudden there's this rift, and it becomes just the nastiest experience, and that can tear families apart for forever. So, I mean, you've seen it a million times, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. And the dynamics of that can be just, like I said, it could really make the experience. Of what I find is, when a family's dealing with that, they can't actually grieve yet, because they're so lost, and there's so much in the shock of dealing with just that one issue, that they aren't able to actually process the death, which is the important part. And you're absolutely right. People are looking for like-minded people to talk about death, because they can't talk about it openly in their communities or in their families, which is the saddest part. They're so isolated out there when they want to talk about death, because they don't think A, it's appropriate, or B, no one's going to listen. No, we're out here. This is happening. And I think it's like your project, like this podcast. We need to have these discussions.
If you do it right, you learn so much about your background. You learn so much about your family. You learn that you can be related to somebody who is so different than you, yet you've got that connection based on memories, and your memories of your family members could be so different, and it's enlightening. You can talk about those things when it's time to really plan the funeral, even if it's, even if somebody's going to die and that's the occasion you come. So there's an imminent, death. You still have this perspective that can be shared. So I really do think that's part of the importance of talking about this beforehand, is not only so you grieve better, so you can focus on, the person's life instead of the details of their death, but also it is very, very heal. You kind of it's more of a cruise into the grieving process, as opposed to a step. Somebody died, we have to take care of the business. And then you take a deep breath and you're like, okay, they're gone. Now what? And it's just not a healthy entrance into getting yourself to have a happy life without whoever is going to be around forever.
So Dean, kind of our story, born and raised around the funeral home. What brought you here? What really got you to think this way?
Well, what's interesting, okay, so I'm a military brat. I moved 18 times in 17 years when I was growing up. I lived all over. I was born overseas. And before I had to move during my senior year after living in Italy for 3 years, and we moved to Omaha, Nebraska. That was my dad's terminal assignment. And that after he retired, he left me in Nebraska because I had in-state tuition. He said he'd help me pay if I came to Nebraska, but if I went out of state and had high tuition, I'd be on my own. So I ended up in Nebraska and met my wife at the University of Nebraska. After I spent 5 years in college and still didn't finish because I got a radio job when I was a sophomore, and of course my career goals overtook my academic goals. A friend of mine and I started a little marketing agency. I've always been, fancied myself to be a good writer. It's something I did every time I moved somewhere, and I was, it was just me until I got into the, community. I just, wrote, I observed, I knew that I had to assimilate, never had a hometown, never felt part of community. And all of these things stoked my desire to be, I wanted to be a doctor growing up, and I wanted to be a town doc. I wanted to live in a town. I wanted to be the doctor. I want to take care of everybody. And I just wanted to put down roots. So when we started this agency, we got a call from a funeral home in Lincoln, Nebraska, that said that they would like to do some marketing. So we went into the funeral home, and after a few weeks, I was enamored with the business because it was a lot like being the town doc. There was a ministry to it. There was a healing power to it. When I first saw a Nebraska football player come into the funeral home, and the funeral director that became my friend was a former Nebraska player, a long, long time ago, almost 7 feet tall. And he was beside himself with his little, short cheerleader girlfriend looking at this big, strong young man. Never saw him in this state before. He lost his mom. And Leroy, the funeral director, kind of gave him one of these forearm handshakes, grabbed him by the elbow and put his hand on his shoulder. And this guy took a deep breath and like there was literally a transfer of energy between the funeral director and this giant man. And it was, I swear, he calmed down. Everything just kind of, got calm. And I went, man, this is what I want to do. And so after that whole episode and working with the firm for a while, I told Leroy, I think I want to be a funeral director. And he sort of talked me out of it, because by then we were gaining some ground with us promoting the brand of the funeral home as a place where people could come, not just when they needed to plan a funeral or necessarily talk about an upcoming death, but to resolve issues, because they had a death. And Leroy said, hey, look, what you're doing for us is needed by funeral homes. So stay close to the business. I'll introduce you to a bunch of other funeral directors and do for them what you did for me, just not in town. Pretty soon we were working with a couple hundred funeral homes, and my business partner really didn't want to be in that business. And so we split up, and I just kept working with funeral homes. And then my current company that's sponsoring this project basically said, hey, why don't you do for us what you're doing for yourself? We work with like 3,000 funeral homes, and just set up what you have in our company, and let's really help funeral homes, pull back the curtain, do some PR, reach out and touch the people, and try and get some attitudes changed. And it's been a slog, but that's been what I've been doing. And then about 5 years after joining the company, I said, you know what? This is not going to happen. We've got to create a demand pull. We can't continue to put the burden on our funeral home owners to spend the time, energy, effort, money to carry this message to consumers about how to think about end of life. Let's invest in a way to draw consumers out, and it may rise the whole tide, for all companies that compete with us maybe in our space. But right now, there's so many people that don't know about it, that when they find out about, thinking in advance, they all think it's a good idea. Nobody ever, after I tell people what I do, they don't say, well, that's stupid. Why would anybody want to plan a funeral in advance? They all go, I didn't know you could do that. And after they've done it, 43% of the people who prearrange actively communicate, recommend it. Don't just tell people they do it. They recommend it to others. And that's been consistent for 12 years that we've been doing the research. So what we do and what you guys are doing is right and good. People are thinking about it, and they're simmering underneath the surface about it. We just got to bring them out, and that's what we're trying to do.
We got to boil that pot a little bit more, huh?
I think so.
We got to get them going.
Yeah.
I got 2 questions for you, Dean.
Sure.
Do you have a plan? A.
I do.
And B, have you changed your plan?
Yes. Both my wife and I actually work for the same company. So she's on the sales side and I'm in the communication side. And so we knew the importance of it. When we decided to change a little bit about our plan was when our son passed away. He was in the Marine Corps. He went to Afghanistan in 2013, 14, came back home and was one of those 22 a day you hear about that just couldn't get the motor started afterwards. And he had a lot of demons, and as your life changes is when you start thinking about, what that tapestry is, what's the story you want to make sure that is communicated about you, through a funeral. And so there are some things and that we learned about ourselves that we wanted to do. We wanted our son's story to be a big part of our stories. And we have 2 other daughters that are healthy and living, and and one way or another, spending their inheritance on weddings and things. But but we just felt that thing that happened to us caused us to think a little bit more about the kind of memorial we wanted. I've always thought that I really felt it was important to make sure that people had an opportunity to memorialize my life if they wanted to, and we have provisions for that. But I think that I may be changing my mind about cremation a little bit. It just depends on where you live, and I think that when you plan your funeral, even if you find a way, use a method to pay for it in advance, if you use the right method, then you own that money. It's yours. And so you can make changes how you want. So if you're going to put down roots somewhere and you know where you want to be buried, whether it's your cremated remains or your earthly remains, then, that's a more permanent thing. But I know that folks sometimes object to planning in advance because they think it's permanent and they're stuck. And that's not always the case. If you want to change from burial to cremation, it makes it easier to move you around. In fact, I'm wearing a necklace right now with my son, part of his cremated remains are in it. So as your life changes, you're able to change your plan. And I encourage that because your life story changes, your lived experiences change. And so that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people do believe that it's a final thing, when you put your plans in place in advance, and it really isn't.
Well, it's also, you practice what you preach too. You're not just talking the talk. You're walking. Real quick, Dean, what was your son's name?
His name was Adam. And he was a corporal, and he's buried less than a mile away in the Veterans Cemetery. So that's pretty cool.
Well, let's Doc, I think we should put this episode to Adam. This episode's for Adam. How about that?
Oh, well, I really appreciate that, guys. That's very special. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, it's important. And I'm sure Doc feels the same way. Our condolences on that. That's a huge thing, and it's impressive that you're still doing what you're doing. With that being said as well.
Well, honestly, guys, you're part of the funeral profession. And as you know, the funeral profession has a giant warm blanket that they put over people when they know, because you do this every day. And the one thing that always got me worried when I made my decision to ask Leroy if he would, sort of be my sponsor is, you hear about funeral directors when they're young people, and inevitably a 6-year-old child passes who had to be autopsied, and they have to take care of that child so that the parents can have their moment with the child, if in a casket or whatever. And I could not imagine being an individual who has a 6-year-old child at home, standing there in the prep room, and looking at this young child and knowing I have one at home. I mean, every day. And so part of the reason I'm doing this is because, when people plan in advance, it makes it easy on the funeral professional as well. In so many ways, they can do their job of ushering somebody through a process in a way that is a lot more fulfilling for both the business person, the funeral director, the caretaker, and the family, because you're talking about commemoration, memorialization, celebration, and not clicking off the box of hundreds of decisions you have to make, which, when Adam died, I knew I wasn't in my right mind. He and I rode in the Patriot Guard riders, military escorts for funerals, for veterans funerals. And the first call I made when I found him was to my Patriot Guard captain. First call, because I knew what funeral home we were going to use and everything. But so I called him up, and when it got time to plan the funeral, if the funeral director did not go through the steps and take care to go through each one, you've heard of Harley hearses before, the caissons that are built.
Yep.
That
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Vroom,
so
vroom.
I called the Patriot Guard guy, right? And Jill and I went in there, and we're pros. We know this business. We let John take us through the process. When he got to the livery, which in lay terms is the coach or the hearse, the flower car, all the family vehicles and everything, he got to the picture of the Harley hearse. He says, "Yeah, well, we have the Harley hearse. I'm assuming you want that." And that's the first moment that I lost my composure. And the reason is because that's when I knew I wasn't in the right mind to make all the decisions I needed to make for my son that I knew so well, for the things that I thought I knew so well. That's when I knew it was real. And that's when I knew I was in trouble, because you only have one chance to do that right. And I called the Patriot Guard. I've ridden behind hundreds of Harley hearses before, and it didn't even dawn on me to make sure that that was on my list.
I think you nailed it. I think when you really do lose someone that meant the world to you, I don't think you are in the right mind frame.
Mm-mm.
Everything goes out the window. at that
Everything goes,
point,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
so it is so easy to get lost in. As a psychologist, right? I deal with
Mhm.
this on a daily basis, and my clients will talk about things like, I wish I would have been able to do this, or I wish I would have done this better, and I always tell them the same thing. I say, listen, you really, literally were not in the right mind frame. You got thrown into it, and if you don't prearrange your funeral, there is so much information that funeral director unfortunately has to get. So when you're
Mhm.
sitting there and they're like, okay, do you got, if they were in the military, do you got dad's military papers? Okay, if you don't, you got to find them. Do you have dad's life insurance plan? Do you know where that's at? And again, we come from a very small, very traditional, very conservative town. So, dad didn't ever want to talk about that stuff because dad was never going to die, right? That's
Mhm.
the reality, right?
Right. Or you'll
so-
know what to do.
Right,
How
right.
can you
Oh,
not
that's
know?
it.
Or put me in a box, bury me in the backyard, right? And
Right.
that's all you hear, right?
Right.
So
With your goldfish and your hamster. Yeah.
Perfect.
absolutely, yes. Preferably, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. Even a person who knows this industry from the inside out, like you do, because you work with us all the time, you still didn't, weren't in the right mind frame to make that perfect decision.
You don't know what you don't know.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I hear it all the time too. The I don't want my family to have to deal with my death. Well, guess what? They're going to deal with your death regardless. So
Right.
what I find too about discussions, when people have discussions, whether it's pre-need or just with their family, they change their mind because they want to also be a good healing for their family, right? They
Mhm.
wanted a direct cremation, and then one of their grandkids was like, I don't know if I could deal with that. I would at
Right.
least give me some sort of opportunity to say goodbye, and then they change it, or they'll come in and they'll do a pre-need for their wife, and they'll want the whole 9 yards. They want everything, and
Right.
then it'll go to him, and he'll say, "Well, I want nothing," and his wife will say, "Well, that's not what I want. That's not what I want for you, right?" It is.
Right.
We get kind of lost sometimes in individualism when we think about setting up our own funeral. And to be honest with you, Dean, the funeral's for everybody else. To be
Exactly.
honest. And I think that's where sometimes it gets lost. But Dean, I really think this is amazing project, and it literally it's on the same page as what we're talking about, and others are starting to. And that's really just to start this discussion, get people talking. If you haven't come up with any plans, even just writing it down yourself, even going through that experience yourself, you might be surprised at how much you put down, and then how much you want to actually talk about with your loved ones. And Dean, you nailed it, right? Not only has nobody said, "Oh," and I've never heard that either. Like, "Oh, I'm just upset that Dad did a pre-need," or blah 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 blah. No one has ever said that. If anything, this makes our life so much easier in this time of grief. And you're saying 40% are going out and suggesting it to others.
43% actually recommend it, not suggest it. They don't tell them what they did. They recommend it to others. And they do it for the reasons you said. They don't want to leave the financials to their kids. They don't want to leave their emotional burden to the kids. They feel it's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. The older demographics say it's their duty. And everybody feels obligated, but nobody feels comfortable actually or knows how to start. I think your podcast and hopefully our project will give people permission to believe that there are ways to do it. And there's lots of resources out there, tons.
Dean, I just want to thank you for bringing value back to the funeral, because I think that's one thing that we
appreciate
are desperately trying to educate people on, is the importance of it. And maybe it's not important to you specifically as a listener out there, but I guarantee you that someone around you does. So,
well, here's the thing, guys. You don't know what you got till it's gone. And when
That's
COVID
it.
hit and people realized that they couldn't come in large groups to gather to commemorate people who died, they all of a sudden started realizing the value of those gatherings and the importance of funerals. So this is a perfect time for all of us to make sure that folks know that, you get one chance for these loved ones to be remembered the right way. And there's a lot of people who can help you do that before things happen and their backs against the wall.
And talk to Dean and Ben, because if you don't talk to Dean and Ben, you're going to probably come talk to me.
Absolutely.
Oh, there you go.
That's the way it's got.
Ooh.
The way it's going to be.
Ooh, the bubble, and there's a little bubble in there right there for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But thank you, Dean, so much. Your Love Always project is incredible. Like I said, it's very like-minded, and I'm just proud that we have this platform to commemorate your project and get people talking about death. So thank you.
Well, thanks for what you do
so much, Dean Lambert.
All right.
Well, and thanks for your son for giving us the opportunity to live in a country that we can do this kind of stuff.
Serving.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yep, he played a small part in it, and there's a lot of folks that unfortunately went down his path, but they're all remembered well.
No, and also Leroy out there for that.
Leroy Butheris, Lincoln, Nebraska. Yep.
Well, thank you, Dean. You've been wonderful, and it has been a pleasure. This Love Always project seems to be just what this world needs. And for all of you out there, if you haven't, please like our podcast, share our podcast, maybe give us a review. We always love them reviews. If you have any questions, please open your email up and compose a message to let's talk about death pod@gmail.com.
And new on Spotify, you can give us a thumbs up, right? That's the new thing on Spotify.
Sounds right.
Make sure you like us, love us, and keep listening.
And Doc Nick, if you're not talking about death,
You're not living. Thank you. Have a great night.